Hello ladies and gentlemen, my name is Keegan and welcome to this video all about the Gold Coast Suns season in review. So without any further ado, off the top, I could probably tell you, and you probably already know, that it is a very disappointing season for us. We finished 15th, just in front of Essendon, who had their complete season run when they had suspensions due to drug allegations, and then you had Fremantle and Brisbane, who just had horror years, and only to finish above those three teams is very, very disappointing. 6 wins, not nearly good enough for us. There were a couple of excuses. Injury is obviously the second year in a row that injuries completely ruined our season. We used 40 people on our list, which is almost our entire senior list, bar two people, which were Swallow and O'Meara, who didn't even get out for a single game. There have been changes. There have been changes touted from the club and from what you hear about health personnel and physio personnel and fitness personnel being changed around at the club constantly to try and get that same mix to avoid this situation heading into another year. And I think the club has done the right thing and they've gotten on top of it. So hopefully that translates to keeping people fit and keeping them on the field and putting our best team out as much as possible. Obviously, we need to improve considerably heading into the new year. That's an understatement. And this probably gets said every year, but this is the most important year for the club. There are big name people leaving the club now, Pressia and O'Meara, and we're going to talk about them in a little bit. But we need to make sure that we keep hold of those players. And how we keep hold of players that are thinking about they might want to leave is by winning games of football. So if we can get more successful, we can push towards those finals next year, then it is going to be amazing help in trying to retain those players. If we see that we're a competitive outfit, they're going to be less likely to leave. So the high point of the season was in the first three rounds. We won our first three games and were looking absolutely amazing and looking like superstars. The high point was probably that round 2 win over Fremantle. It's before people found out Fremantle were a bit of a basket case this year. We went over there not given any hope in the world of knocking off Fremantle. We went over there, we did it, our first win in WA. It was an amazing win. Gary Ablett came out and said it's probably the best win the club had ever had, and I tend to agree. I thought it was one of our best wins for the year. Not that there was too many of them, but for the amount of wins we had, it was our best win for the year, and I was really happy with it. As far as the low point goes, we had many weeks where we got absolutely towed up by the opposition and we didn't have a hope in the world. There were a string of about 5 or 6 games where we lost by 70 points plus for those 5 games, which was entirely crushing. But it wasn't the low point of the season for me. The low point of the season was round 4 loss to Brisbane, and that's where our season seemed to fall apart. Now, we'd won the first 3 games. We were looking like absolute, as I said before, superstars. We're going to look like we're going to play our first year of finals. It was going to be all fine and dandy. And then we got to Brisbane with obviously got ahead of ourselves thinking, we're just going to walk into Brisbane and beat them. And we lost. And that was the point that Stephen May just got himself rubbed out for 6 weeks. And that's where the season decidedly turned for the worse for the Suns. And from then on, we went on a 10-game losing streak, starting with that game. So even though we had games where we lost by more or we looked almost uncompetitive, that point, it was the low point for me because that's where the season started to rot. So MVPs for the Suns this year. Obviously, the big main one is Tom Lynch. He absolutely decimated defences. Even with the poor quality of the ball that was coming in, he looked unstoppable at times, taking contested marks, kicking goals. Ended up third in the Coleman, behind Josh Kennedy and Franken, who are quality A-list forwards. So good to see Tom Lynch is my MVP for the season because without him, I'd hate to see where the Suns would have ended up this year. We had a few honourable mentions too. Miller, always trying in the midfield. He's always putting his stamp on the game. He's not the quickest. He probably doesn't have the best kick, but he gets in and has a crack. And he had games where he racked 30 plus touches up a couple of times, which is great to see. May is another one. After the suspension, after he came back from the suspension, he was an absolute rock for us in the second half of the year. He was spoiling, taking marks. He looked like an absolute machine in the defence and held it together once he came back, which was exciting to see. and the last one was Sexton, someone that probably had a breakout year. He probably, outside of Lynch, who stepped up his game 100%. Sexton's probably there step to step with him as far as improvement goes. He went from being a fringe player, someone that you didn't know that sort of skirted the outside, to having a real impact. Starting in the middle, we've seen through this period where we had all these injuries that we found a few midfielders, and Sexton is one of them. It's one that I think we can push forward with heading into 2017 as a good player that can play in the middle when we don't have our top liners around. So the dreaded part of this video is the expected outs. And the two at the top of the list are Amira and Presti, who have confirmed that they want to leave the club and will probably end up leaving the club, which is hugely disappointing to lose those two. Now, I've made a video on Amira. I made my opinion felt. Has it changed in that time? Probably not. I completely understand where he's coming from, where he wants to leave, get a fresh start. Because of the worries over his knee, he wants to get away from that environment that has hampered him for 2 years and get to somewhere where he can make a fresh start. And I completely understand. It's just disappointing from a supporter point of view. Presti has also come out and said that he wants to leave the club. He's put 95 games in. He's elected Richmond as his destination club, which is interesting in itself. Apparently, it's 5. He's getting a 5-year deal at $700K. I'm sort of glad that we're not matching that deal. I don't think he's worth $700K, but the fact that he's got that 5 years, $700K, more power to him. He's setting himself up for the future, which is what any player playing AFL wants to do. They want to set themselves up for the future because AFL's such a short-term career. Other than those two big names that are leaving the club, you've got Russell and Tate and Stanley, who for me are the three that are probably just going to end up being... Well, Russell and Tate will probably end up being delisted. Stanley has had a really good time at the Suns. In the early years, he was really important. He was an important member. He was our leading goal kicker for the first year we played, funnily enough, with about 26 goals. And from then on, he played really important parts for us. But over the past couple of years, he hasn't been able to have a run at it. He's been playing decently in the twos, but obviously just Father Time catches up with everyone, and he's unfortunately had to be moved on. So they're the three that are probably going to be delisted at the end of the year. And then you also have a couple of others that have, as you can see, have question marks next to them, where I'm not sure if they're going to leave. You've got Cameron, Shaw, Matera, Leslie and Shade. Some at the end of their contract, some with a bit of talk about them possibly leaving. Cameron is a really, really good... I love the bloke. He really puts in a lot of effort. But he had a decent start to the year, and then towards the end of the year, he couldn't get a look at it. So whether he gets traded on or whether he just ends up not being part of the list next year, we'll wait and see. He's not contracted for next year, so we'll have to wait and see on him. Shaw's actually, he's an interesting one. He had a really good second half of the year. He was in our team. He was running up and down the wings. He was looking really, really good. And I feel like the club might think this is the perfect time to offload him. He might want to move away to a different club, move back towards family and friends. And while he's got a bit of value about him, it might be the time to move him. He might only get a late second round, early third round pick, but this is the time. He's shown some form. He's shown that he has a bit of get up and go about him, and we might benefit from a move for him, and he might benefit from a move himself. Matera is probably one of the ones that gets talked about a lot. There's a lot of talk about him moving to Melbourne or him moving back to WA. It'll be an interesting wait and see approach. He has shown glimpses that he can be a really good small forward. But as far as being a Sun supporter goes, small forwards like Archie and Garlett have shown a bit more, for me at least, in the sort of pressure department and in the pressure department as far as tackles go. It's something Matera has never sort of been able to get a real hold of consistently as tackles, and I think Garlett and Archie do that, and they do that really well, playing that high half forward, leading up and running back to be at front and centre for Lynch or Day or Wright. So I think Matera, he can be moved on, and he can probably be moved on with a bit of currency. Again, a late second rounder would probably be about fair for Matera, I would have thought. But I've got my Gold Coast Suns glasses on, so maybe I'm wrong. Let me know in the comments below. Leslie and Shade are two defenders that haven't had a look at it this year. Leslie he looks like an absolute gorilla. He's a massive unit. He just hasn't had to be able to have a crack at the team, even with all the injuries. So that probably means writing on the wall for him, and same with Shade. So I'm assuming they'll be moved on. Leslie's only been in the system for 2 to 3 years, so he'll find it. If a club's looking for a young defender, he might be the one they look for. We might get a bit of currency with him, but I'm not looking for anything too large out of those two. So what would the club be looking for this upcoming trade period? Now, we've got our defence, our key defenders sorted with May and Thompson, and our key forwards with Wright, Lynch and Day. So we need midfielders. We need as many quality, solid midfielders, but that can get a bit of the ball, that are big bodies. We need a few inside. We need maybe 1 or 2 outside midfielders, but we need midfielders. It's really thin at the moment. We've got Ablett and Swallow, who probably are at the top of that list. Then you've got the likes of Hall, Miller, Sexton, Lonigan. And then that's probably where those quality mids end, and where you've got part-timers in, like Rosa, who can go in there for a couple of bounces. Martin, who's probably not built for a midfield, but can probably go in there for a couple of bounces too. And Riscatelli, he'll probably be back at the second half of the year after his knee recovers. So we need midfielders. We probably need one. I would like have one high quality, highly touted midfielder, and then a couple of 3 or 4 just solid midfielders that are in that 22 to 26 age bracket, that have a couple of years, that can be used as foot soldiers just to get the ball to our better movers, our better disposal players that can move the ball forward. So I reckon one, as I said, just to reiterate and go over, one really high quality player, and then 3 or 4 solid players that will do a job. As far as prediction goes, I'm going to do that after I find out who's left on the list after the trade period and the draft period is over. I'm really, really excited for this year's draft. We have 6 of the top 27 picks in the draft this year. That means we can bring in some real quality kids, and we can also trade those draft picks on, hopefully, for that quality midfielder or midfielders I was talking about earlier. So it's really, really exciting time as far as a trade period goes. While it might be a bit sad to be seeing the likes of O'Meara and Prestia going, we have that sort of those sort of resources that we can really start turning our season, our club around in 2017 and moving on up the ladder. So I'll give a bit of a prediction and a bit of an aftermath of the trade period after that's all been one and done. Well guys, thank you for watching. Make sure you do like the video if you enjoyed what I was talking about. Subscribe so you don't miss any videos on the channel. And do let me know in the comments below if you agree with what I think of the Suns. What do you think they can do to improve next year? Do you think they'll improve next year? Do you think they will go up the ladder? Or do you think they're going to just sort of sit around where they are at the moment? Do let me know in the comments below. Thank you for watching guys. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you later.